Hey everybody, and welcome back to part two of our conversation this, morning with Dr. Delahoussaye, who teaches junior morality at Jesuit High School of New Orleans. I am Father Minsal. I teach seniors philosophy here, and our conversation today is going to be about the Ring of Gyges from Book 2 of Plato's Republic. So briefly, Dr. Delahoussaye, I'd like to just kind of set it up and see where we go from here. As I understand the Ring of Gyges, it's kind of a thought experiment that Glaucon is launching against Socrates. And Glaucon was, at this point in the dialogue, a little bit dissatisfied with Socrates' initial definition of justice. And Glaucon, wants Socrates to explain and defend justice always and everywhere as a good in and of its own sake. So Glaucon comes up with this story of the Ring of Gyges, of a man who discovered a ring. It has a great power of invisibility. And Gyges discovers that he can kill the king, take his wife, and become king himself of the kingdom with its power. So Glaucon says, if we were to give the ring to a just man and also an unjust man, the just man would be a fool not to use its power, because he would be able to get away with evil and not be punished for it. And the real motivation behind all of this reveals, Glaucon says, that most people only do justice to avoid the punishment. Most people only do justice because they fear being caught. And if one's caught, then one is punished, and then one doesn't want that, so one avoids it by all costs. And then you comply with justice as if it were some kind of external force that is somewhat contrary to our inner disposition and real inner desires. So naturally, when faced with this problem, it's very provocative, because there are times in us that we want to do justice, but we don't have the reasoning. But Glaucon's thought experiment, I think, is so provocative and so fascinating that it wipes away all of the masks, and it seems to get at something kind of very deep within human nature. So what would you say about its kind of overall import to our understanding of morality?
I think it's extremely revealing. And as you said, Glaucon is Plato's older brother. And in the first book of the Republic, Socrates gets into a heated debate with a sophist, a guy named Thrasymachus. And at the end of book one, Thrasymachus concedes to Socrates. Glaucon thinks, well, who's on Plato's side, right? It's one of the unique things about Plato as a philosopher. He includes in his own books sometimes the best arguments against his own position. So
that was whether Glaucon was a sophist or not. Some students were asking me.
Yeah, he's on Socrates' side, but he thinks that Socrates got off too easy. Thrasymachus conceded too quickly, and Socrates had a reputation, and maybe it was really the true reputation, that he was very reluctant to state his own opinions about things. You know, with Socratic ignorance, he knew that he didn't know. So here, people often see that Plato is pushing beyond maybe where Socrates would have stopped. And so Glaucon formulates this, I guess, a way of encapsulating Thrasymachus' position. And in encapsulating it, giving Socrates sort of a foil, a very serious foil, so that Socrates can present his own opinion. It has been argued, there's so many things argued in Plato back and forth, but you can never speak. But it has been argued that Plato found this the most dangerous moral position out there, and that he saw this in the world around him. He saw people knowingly, consciously acting on this moral viewpoint. Because from what Father said earlier, we all recognize that sometimes our own moral attitudes are immature, that sometimes we will do things or not do things simply from fear, not because we're deeply motivated to do them, not from noble motives, but we will, I will do what my wife says, not from love, but from fear, right? Which is not a noble motivation, right? So we all recognize that there is that type of moral immaturity in all of us at certain times and certain situations. Gyges is someone who is not. Is not making lapses. He's not. What he's talking about is a system of understanding morality, in which morality is empty, is vacuous. Uh, it it is better not to. It's better to realize that it's just a invention and a manipulation of human beings, and that the truly mature person would realize this, and therefore his hands would no longer be tied, right? So one of the appeals of someone like Gyges or Thrasymachus is uh, you seem to be, it seems you are incredibly flexible and adaptable, that with each new situation you encounter, you have no limits or holds on what you can do, on your behavior. Where the moral person is going to have his hands tied, he will, in advance, of necessity, rule out certain strategies as undoable, or at least as immoral, and as something he ought not to do. He would fail if he did it, right? So, Gyges, looking at the moral person, sees someone who is self-constrained and inflexible, and therefore easily victimized and easily defeated. Uh, so,
and to connect it perhaps to our previous kind of conversation on the allegory of the cave, I think Gyges would certainly be one that says, well, this kind of external world beyond the cave doesn't really exist.
yeah,
And that what exists are whatever one's impressions are of goodness, of morality, of justice. These are the determinants. And that the enlightened person, as you were kind of suggesting, the enlightened person is the one who is able to precisely grasp these or take advantage that some things are unknowable or undiscernible or inunderstandable, and therefore manipulate them to his favor. And so because there isn't this independent, universal understanding of morality or of goodness, the enlightened person is one who knows how to use morality, goodness, and justice to one's favor, and therefore, get away with whatever needs to be done in order to achieve what one desires. The rules of society are essentially precisely that: artificial, man-made, and therefore subject to one's own kind of manipulation, as it were, because that's, after all, what they are, is man-made things.
yeah, that's very well said, and that really is and we need to hasten to add that you see this a lot in the modern world, that someone like Thrasymachus or Gyges does not need to deny that there are objective truths in science, for instance, or that there would be the perfect form or the perfect idea of a wheel. So he doesn't need to be that radical. He can recognize, much like the modern world, who takes very seriously statements in science and so forth as authoritative. But when it comes to morality, there's this incredible doubt and suspicion that something is not right in moral discourse. And the illumination of Gyges is that could be in reading the cave, because he is, let me slow down just a little bit. Gyges is another reading of the cave. It's sort of the Plato. It's like Plato kryptonite against Plato. So on his reading of the cave, there could be absolute truths in all sorts of areas, but that there is no guides under the sun in the world, in the eternal world, for morality. That it's a wasteland. The place outside a cave is a moral wasteland. There's no objective and eternal moral truths. So he realizes now that his illumination is just that, to realize that, yes, I literally have no restraints on my behavior outside of my own subjective restraints. That my task in life is becomes a question of power or assertion or domination. That he's playing now, the switch metaphors, a game of King of the Hill. He wants to be King of the Hill, and he's not ruling out any strategy to beat you in a game of King of the Hill. So this is it's in that way he has no restraints on him. So let me
I'd say, yeah, that there's but therein kind of lies, I think, a danger, as you're saying. If Gyges is the kryptonite, Plato would say this is a highly dangerous position. To pick off on what you had mentioned at the beginning, is precisely because the definition of morality is vacuous. If this is the claim, and you could say, well, there are so many accounts of morality, so many different lifestyles, so many different tastes and flavors and applications of the law, and what was just in one time period is now not just, and what one person thinks is just, may not actually be just, or maybe it is, but who's to say? But it creates a vacuum, a moral vacuum, and an intellectual vacuum, but it seems most disturbing because the vacuum cannot really remain empty. Like something, we have to live our lives somehow. And so I guess that's kind of my question here is, how is that vacuum filled? I mean, maybe a part of it is ourselves, like we fill up the definition as we wish, which can be a potentially dangerous, maybe very highly dangerous thing, or other people, fill it for us. I think a part of it is that too, that we are led to pursue the things that we've been taught are good, maybe by others, or it's I guess also a material good, and it's not at all an internal one that's proper to the soul, but it's one that's proper to our external success in some sense. But isn't that also something that maybe we've been taught? I guess is what I think. Maybe what wouldn't Plato kind of suggest that we've been taught, perhaps, or we live in a world that wants to pursue these external goods. But I wonder if Plato would be pointing in the direction of, well, isn't there an internal good that is proper to the soul? But anyways, to stick with Gyges, I think there is a vacuum in terms of morality, but the vacuum must be filled. And my question is, I guess, how, and is that a good thing?
Right. Yeah, I think Plato, of course, is in the process, will take the entire book to break apart, diffuse, eliminate, show that it's not actually kryptonite, show that it's actually just dangerous and false. In fact, the most dangerous moral position possible. And it is and when you look at it, Plato would say, look at not only at what this person does to others. He's intentionally deceptive, he's a liar, a manipulator. Look at what's going on inside of him, right? Would this person would you trust this man as a husband, a father, a leader? He is disturbed, right? He is a very dangerous lone wolf type of a person. although he exercises a certain attraction on human beings, just because we are terrified of losing. And Plato's entire effort will try to show him that this guy is the ultimate loser. He is both destructive to himself and others. As seductive as his position can be, it is ultimately and immediate, in fact, not just ultimately, immediately self-destructive, both to him individually and to a community. You can imagine this man as a politician, right? Or you can imagine, the students can imagine thinking about marrying someone who, it turns out you find out at the 11th hour that your fiance holds these values. Your fiance is another iteration of Gyges or Thrasymachus. I mean, hopefully you wouldn't marry her. This is not a person to place your confidence in. I mean, Plato is going to say that, was going to ask this question. The Gyges is asking this question: what is success? Right? Gyges will attain, and does in the story, attain worldly success. He realizes his subjective desires because he needs an audience to perform in front of. He wants adulation. In some sense, that makes him weak. He is dependent upon an audience. He wants applause. He wants worldly success. And in the story, he attains it. And you and I can easily imagine that if someone like him would be capable of attaining great worldly success. Plato's going to ask, is that really success, right? Or is he failing at what is most important? Then here you go to what Jesus' famous saying. I think Plato, if he had heard it, Plato came before Jesus, but if this saying had been available to Plato, he would have, I think, very, very quickly agreed with it. As Jesus said, what does it gain a person what does it gain? What does it give you or gain if you gain the world and lose your soul? And this, for Plato, this Gyges character, Thrasymachus, has lost his soul. And in losing his soul, he is a destructive and a force for injustice and cruelty and morality in the world around him. That he is a plague on society, and his own inner world is plagued by his own beliefs.
And so, it seems that, to pick up on where we were before, like the good is now outside, or it's an external thing. It's not something proper to oneself. Therefore, it's in the exercise of attaining those external goods where morality is to be found. Morality is the pursuit of those external goods to my own advantage. And so the vacuum is filled by myself, but really by maybe the hole in myself that I am not, by acquiring these external goods that I identify with and have power over. Could you explain for us a little bit? I was looking at your handouts, and there's this saying, might makes right. And so what's the role of this saying in Gyges' teachings here for us? What does it mean for him that the enlightened person is the mighty one and the one who makes right things with his might?
Right. That's what you were saying in different terms, is that the mighty person is the one who decides what is just and unjust. And just and unjust is basically whatever serves his interest. The just is what serves. To label something as just serves his interest. To label something as unjust serves his interest. So he's in a weird situation in the sense that if you and I were saying, you know, what makes a healthy body, right? We would know that certain actions would contribute to a healthy body, and certain actions would not contribute, right? So I could eat, you know, a box of zebra cakes or Twinkies a day, or 2 boxes, right? And I may subjectively believe that this will make my body healthier, right? And I may watch people running marathons and believe that, you know, this act is actually somehow vicariously making my body healthier. We know this is false, right? We know that certain objective things that I could do, eating better, getting regular exercise, so forth, are actions among many different types of actions that would actually contribute to my own physical health. And that there are other actions like, you know, chain consuming, you know, Twinkies or chain smoking cigarettes, which will be objectively bad for my health. Thrasymachus and Gyges tend to assume that that whatever they subjectively decide is good for them is by that very fact good for them. That they can do any old action, you know. They could, you know, help the little old lady cross the street or kick the little old lady across the street. And either one is fine. You know, you help the little old lady or you push her in front of a truck, that either one is going to, just because you define that as an action which is good for you, it is good for you, that you have your might makes right. Because I've decided that this is good to do, ipso facto, by that very fact, it is something good for me to do. And for Plato, this is not only illogical, but seductive and dangerous.
Yeah, might makes right. Because I can get away with it, therefore it is right. Because no one can stop me, because no one can give me a punishment for my actions, I am mighty because I'm basically invincible. Therefore, that determines what's right. So I'm able to get away with it, and therefore it is right. Could we make one more connection also to the sensible knave? What is the great lesson here that the sensible knave teaches us? Sometimes we maybe don't want to, you know, push the old lady into the street, but maybe we do want our enemy to get pushed into the street. Right. We do want our competitor to kind of trip up in the race the last minute. We want our competitor to strike out, and if we can kind of deceive reality in such a way that our enemies just slip up just a little bit so that we can get ahead, this is something that just seems still in Gyges' worldview, and even that perhaps of the sensible knave, to just be a desire too good to pass up. So how do we understand the sensible knave?
Yeah, the sensible knave is really just a modern expression of Thrasymachus and of Gyges. And once again, his point of view is that morality is an illusion or an invention, a manipulation. And his task in life is, once again, one of deception. For Plato, a clear sign of a faulty moral, of a faulty stance, a false illumination. He must appear noble and just, because otherwise he could not fool people. So he will play the just person, but he will do whatever injustice he can get away with, and that is to his advantage, right? So, you know, as one person said, hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue, right? So he is a consummate hypocrite. Uh, and he wants to keep, he will take advantage of all the exceptions. So if he's in a business deal and he knows he has signed a contract with someone and he knows he can get away with breaking the deal, he will, and that could profit him greatly. He will break the deal. He will break the contract, right? He will violate the contract. If he's in a contract with someone and he knows he can't violate it without getting burned himself, he will keep the contract. So there's once again this notion that this type of flexibility is actually strength, which is what Gyges and the sensible knaves believe, that he is strong because he is flexible. He's a protean type of a personality. He can keep shifting and changing. And Plato uses this image of someone who is multiform, who keeps altering and changing and shifting, but has no stable center, has no stable interior life, right? Because once you start putting actions onto people and you see the consequences of it, right? So the little old lady obviously is a ludicrous one, but you could imagine, that if I actually did push an old lady in front of a bus, right? And I was the type of person who could walk away from that with no compunction, no regret, thinking highly of myself, that I am seriously deformed in some way, right? And the same thing goes with a contract, which nobody's dying. Maybe the person you're cheating is also already very wealthy, and you're only skimming a little bit off of his already great wealth. But to think that I could cheat in a contract and steal something undeservingly from somebody else, and I could walk away from that thinking highly of myself and have no compunction about it, no sense of guilt, no sense of regret, no sense that this is not right or just. That once again, this says something alarming about myself, because Plato is going to insist that morality is a good that we need to acquire. Of all the possessions that we're not born with and we need to acquire, the most important thing for Plato is this notion of morality, or virtue as he would call it. Of all the things that I need to acquire this most desperately. Before anything else, I need to become a moral person. I need to become the person who realizes it's not good to push old ladies in front of trucks. It's not good to steal on contracts. Not only because I killed the old lady or murder her, not only did I steal, which I do, not only do I steal from someone who doesn't, or take from someone who doesn't deserve it, which I do, I am also degrading myself, worsening myself in doing that.
Yeah, and to kind of conclude here on this note, just by way of maybe foreshadowing or anticipating the rest of what Plato's going to say in the Republic, and our friend also Boethius, who I think will in many ways hit on similar themes, that it boils down to the Ring of Gyges versus Plato, boils down to this, is where do we find our source of the good? Where do we find our source of happiness, of justice? Is it external to us? Is it in the world? Is it a material object? Is it a person? Or is it something that's constitutive of our identity? And I think this is ultimately what Plato is going to say, is that morality, justice, goodness, these things, when they are known and pursued, sometimes without maybe some but when they are known and pursued, they constitute us as human beings, and they make us as we're destined to be in some sense. They put us in communion with something that's anything beyond what exists in the material world, and therefore brings out what is most noble in the human being. And so nothing could be more important than pursuing morality. Nothing could be more important than the just life. Nothing could be more important than discovering what the good is and pursuing it in an immaterial sense, in an intellectual, philosophical sense, because this is what's going to result in the best person. You mentioned earlier, I'll conclude with this, what good is it to gain the whole world and lose one's soul? And I think Plato's maybe version of that from the Oracle of Delphi would be know thyself. If we know who we really are, then we won't turn to the world around us to find our meaning for life, our source of our identity, because we ourselves will be constitutive of it. And we won't rely on others for that out of weakness, but we'll be able to find some happiness and source of meaning in ourselves. I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that a little tiny touch, is that for Plato, Gyges is the most unenlightened person, and his illumination or enlightenment is actually the worst sort of chains that someone could possibly find themselves in, because it produces a person who is radically isolated, who's a manipulator and a user, an abuser. You know, if you've seen the Godfather movies, I watched one of them recently, or what's a famous Al Pacino movie set in Miami, actually? Yeah, Scarface. You know, where do people end up? You know, if the thing is, you know, Plato would say most people who would embrace this position are not going to admit it to themselves. Probably, I would guess Plato would say, are not going to be as full-blooded, as fully aware. They will do it in, as Father mentioned earlier, they will cheat on a business deal and then conform to moral standards when they're in their house with their family and with their friends, right? So they will conveniently play Thrasymachus or Gyges, but then flip back into a moral stance. Now, they are radically inconsistent. That's what George Orwell called doublethink, where you hold two positions which are actually contradictory, but you never bother to bring them together to see your own self-deception, right? So most people in the world will simply cheat conveniently and then flip back into a moral position in their lives. However, the logic of that position is Thrasymachus. If they followed the logic through to its conclusion, they would have to be full-blooded, you know, because if you truly believe that you can cheat with impunity, without guilt, you can murder or without impunity or without guilt, then you are a type of sensible knave, a type of Gyges. And that is your position, even though you may not be consciously aware that it is. You might not be honest enough or courageous enough, where Thrasymachus is sort of this naked, full-blooded realization of what this position means. And it is, for Plato, you know, absolute poison to the individual who embraces it, and poison to any community that this person is in. And ultimately, it's false, and it is evil or bad, right? So, in the strongest sense of that.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Here's our take on the Ring of Gyges. God bless. Bye-bye.